Hello, everyone. My name is Allison Dennis. I serve as Executive Director for the Sitka Center for Art and Ecology, and it is a pleasure to welcome you to Sitka's first resident talk of the season. Thank you for joining us to learn about and help welcome the first of over 50 practitioners who will work and stay at Sitka over the next 7 months. Sitka is located at Cascade Head on the north central Oregon coast. We acknowledge and thank the first peoples and stewards of this place who today are actively represented by the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde and the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians. If you are joining in from somewhere that is not here on the Oregon coast and would like to share a land acknowledgement of your own, you can do so in the chat. We invite you to do so. And now it is my pleasure to introduce the first of tonight's residents. Nadja Lubiw-Hazard is the Ashland Creek Press Siskiyou Prize winner for new environmental literature. She is a writer and veterinarian who holds a doctor in veterinary medicine from the University of Guelph and a postgraduate certificate in creative writing from the Humber School for Writers. Her work has been published in Fiddlehead, Understory, Room, Cantheus, The Dollhouse Review, the New Quarterly. Her first novel, The Nap Away Motel, was published by Palimpsest Press in May 2019. She is currently working on several picture books about animals and a second novel, Saving Serafina. A lifelong animal lover and longtime vegan, Nadja's writing often explores themes related to the natural world. She lives in Toronto with her wife, their 2 daughters, an old black pug, and a feisty, fluffy kitten. Tonight she's here with us, so please make some noise wherever you are and help welcome Nadja Lubiw-Hazard to Sitka.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here, not just here in this community celebrating and sharing art, but here at Sitka Center. I've just been immersed in nature and enjoying myself so much, hiking in the forest and elk spotting and kayaking in the river and watching the seals pop up and walking on the beach. And not only that, but I have the time and solitude to work on my writing. So I'm very grateful. I am a writer. I mostly write novels and short stories, but I do like to write a bit of poetry. And I also love to write for young children. And regardless of what I'm writing, whether it's a poem or a short story, there is almost always an animal theme. I was an animal lover from a very young age. I grew up and became a vet. I've done animal advocacy work. And of course, I've lived with animals, cared for them and rescued them. So it seems only natural that I would also write about them. And when I'm writing about animals, I write in celebration, I write in awe and wonder, but I also write to try and understand and negotiate some of the contradictory ways that we treat animals and view animals in our society. I'm going to read a bit of a short story for you today. And part of the reason for that is I'm working on revising and editing my stories, but also my short story collection was what I submitted to the Siskiyou Prize. And so I was so grateful and astounded to win that prize and have these 2 weeks here. So shout out to Ashland Creek Press and also to Deb Olin Unferth, who was the judge for that contest. So I'm going to read, I guess, probably about half of the story for the time that we have together. And the story is called A Good Dog. They shot all the dogs in Chernobyl after the evacuation. When she reads this, Edith is horrified and unsurprised, both at the same time. People in the cities and villages surrounding the nuclear power plant were told to bring only what they could carry, to leave their pets behind. They believed they would be back in a few days, but they never returned. Edith glances down at Mim, her daughter's dog, a lab corgi mix who is sleeping at her feet. He is dreaming, chasing after rabbits maybe. His short legs are paddling in his sleep and he is barking, but with his muzzle closed. Edith nudges him with her toes and he sighs heavily, his ruffled black lips quivering. She reads on about a young soldier who is given the order to kill the dogs that wag their tails as he approaches, the dogs that lick his hand. He enters an evacuated apartment building, finds a note on one of the doors. Take care of our Mushka. She's a good dog. How old would he be now? It's been more than 30 years since the Chernobyl disaster, so 55, maybe 60. Does he have a dog sleeping at his feet, dreaming of chasing rabbits in the tall grasses? A good dog like Mushka, like Mim? An evacuation, though, what would that be like? Edith lived in Toronto all her life. Has the city ever been evacuated? Not that she can recall, but anything seems possible these days. Didn't they evacuate New Orleans when Katrina hit? A surge of anxiety flushes through her body. Her hands tingle, her chest tightens, her heart races. She pulls out her notebook and jots down, packed bag for possible evacuation. What about Mim, though? She could never leave him behind. And her daughter Rain would never forgive her if something happened to Mim. Edith presses her palm against her breastbone, tries to relieve the pressure there. She has to keep Mim safe because Rain doesn't love anyone except this dog. She reaches for her phone to call her daughter before she remembers that Rain's in rehab. Edith got pregnant with Rain in 1986, the same year as the Chernobyl disaster. She remembers that spring vividly, skipping class with Lori and Kat to hang out in the ravine because it was finally warm enough to wear shorty shorts, because history class sucked, because the forsythia flowers were bursting into bloom. Kat braided Edith's hair. They ate Twizzlers and sang Madonna songs, their heads bouncing up and down from each other's laughter. They whispered their latest dreams to each other. Kat wanted to go to law school. Lori was planning to head to Hollywood, and Edith was going to write a novel. In that golden moment, they'd sworn to stay friends forever. Funny how life takes you where it wants, pulling you along like a rushing river, not caring about your frantic paddling, your desperate desire to go in some other direction. Edith never wrote a novel. Instead, she'd written in her journal, "Brian and I went all the way," with little pink hearts circling the words. And 9 months later, she'd had a fat-cheeked baby with eyes the color of blueberries. And Lori died years ago from suicide, a swan dive from the Bloor Viaduct, long before she ever made it to Hollywood. Edith wonders about Kat from time to time, though. She was the one who'd had her shit together back then. Maybe she'd made it through unscathed, gotten herself a law degree from Harvard and a husband with gorgeous green eyes, had a couple of kids, one on the swim team, the other one a chess champion, bought a cul-de-sac house in Richmond Hill with landscape gardens and a koi pond, and a dog, of course, a golden doodle, goofy but lovable. Kat's family had a dog back in '86, an ancient wire-haired dachshund named Tazy. Even all these years later, Edith can remember the foul smell of that dog's breath. Mim's teeth can't be all that bad, but Edith wonders if Rain's ever taken him in for dentistry or given the dog a dental chew now and again. What if he gets a dental abscess? Edith's heart picks up again, pitter-patter, gallops after her anxious thoughts. Take Mim for a vet check, she jots down in her notebook. Edith calls her older sister Shoshana, tells her about the Chernobyl dogs. I read that they used a dump truck to collect the bodies of the dogs they'd shot. There was this little black poodle, scrabbled out from a load of dead dogs being dumped into a pit. But they'd run out of bullets. They had nothing left to shoot him with. I thought maybe he'd survived the massacre. Edith lets out a soft, quavering breath, but he didn't. Edith, honey, this is so morbid. Why are you telling me this? It just seems important to talk about. It's such a terrible thing, and nobody even knows about it. Once I found out, I thought I owed it to the dogs to learn more. She runs her foot across Mim's furry chest, leaves it there so it can rise and fall with each breath. Now that she's started reading about the dogs, she can't seem to stop, even though she wants to. It's so horrifying that she can't seem to tear herself away. How's Rain? Shoshana asks. I'm worried about her dog. Why? What's wrong with him? Nothing, but I started to think about what I would do with him if there was an evacuation, if there was some disaster. Edith, come on now. We live in Toronto. No earthquakes, no tsunamis. We're good. You need to stop worrying so much. Edith nods her head. Yes, she needs to stop worrying so much. The problem is she can't. The thoughts stream in endlessly, one disaster after another, until she can barely breathe under the weight of them all. They're like troops of soldiers marching through her brain, the heels of their black boots treading down well-worn paths of dread and catastrophe. Did you get out today? Shoshana asks. I'm just about to take Mim for a walk, Edith lies. Mim lifts his head from the floor, gazes at her. His eyes are golden brown like honey. Rain told her once that people get a surge of oxytocin, the love hormone that mothers and babies release when they look into their dog's eyes. And the dogs do too, her daughter had exclaimed. That's good. Some sunshine will do you good, Shoshana says. Sure. But Edith knows the little hit of sun won't ever penetrate deep enough to get to where those soldiers are hunkered down, holding her hostage. That night, when she tries to sleep, she can't get the dogs of Chernobyl out of her mind. She hears them whimpering as she lies awake in her bed. When she gets up to look out into the darkness, she sees them loping through the park behind her house, shimmering with radioactivity. There's a ghostly white dog that moves with a limp, and little Mushka, her stubby tail standing straight up like a flagpole. The black poodle is there, circling and sniffing around the wide trunk of an oak. And she sees a ginger dog that she knows, curly coated and razor thin, with a white diamond of fur on his chest. Long into the night, Edith keeps seeing him, his sharp claws digging into the soft bellies of the dead, trying to get back to the land of the living. In the morning, she Googles cat. Her Facebook page pops up with a profile pic that Edith recognizes instantly. Same downturned smile, same kind gray eyes. She scrolls through the series of photos. No green-eyed husband, no Speedo-clad teenager, no koi pond. But oh, there are dogs. Edith follows a link to Cats, Dogs, a rescue group that Kat has founded, and begins to read. I'm going to stop there. That's about halfway through the story. Thanks so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Nadja. Every time we have someone read in these forums, I'm viscerally reminded of what a powerful and important experience it is to be read aloud to when you're growing up, certainly, but at all ages. It's all reactivated for me. Thank you for reading for us tonight. Sitka Blue Sky photography resident Jordan DeLawder is a photographer, printmaker, and farm worker. Their work engages with ecology, devotion, and queer futurity. Using both original and archival imagery, they imagine entanglements between themselves and the natural world. DeLawder holds a BS in environmental engineering from Tufts University with a minor in studio art. They live in Portland, Oregon, and are a member of Bite Studio and Wave Contemporary Artist Collective. Please help me welcome Jordan DeLawder to Sitka.
Hi, everyone. So happy to be here today. So I'm Jordan. I'm from Portland, Oregon. And I've been here at Sitka for about 3 weeks now. The first 2 weeks here were glorious. We had amazing weather. So I got to go out and do a lot of shooting. And I'm working on a new project that I want to show a sneak peek of at the end of the talk. But before then, I'm going to share some of my previous work and talk about my approaches and things I'm thinking about when I'm making photos. So my practice is really focused on ecological entanglement. So to me, that means inquiring into the places and the moments where humans and non-humans overlap and affect each other. Geologists call the time that we live in the Anthropocene because humans have profoundly changed the biology and chemistry of the earth. So during this time, like the overlaps between human and non-humans are plentiful and diverse and often very surprising. So there are just new adaptations and assemblages that are emerging all the time. So in my work, I try to find the beautiful, poetic, and absurd aspects of our current ecological moment. My photographs are created in the world, so they're often very place-based. The bulk of my practice is building relationships with the sites that I visit. I want it to feel like a reciprocal exchange, not just taking photographs being sort of an extractive thing. So I do this through ritual and arrangement, deep noticing, and embodied play. These are the modes I use to take my photographs, but they're also the modes I use to learn about the land and in turn learn about myself. So this first photo here is called The Path a Memory Takes. It's using arrangement and play to talk about natural cycles, both in the environment, in our emotional and spiritual worlds as well. The name kind of comes from how I usually experience memory, not necessarily something that fades in a linear way, but instead sort of revisits me and spirals out of clarity with time. And I really take inspiration from Andy Goldsworthy and other land artists in using organic materials that are ephemeral, found on site, and they can be sort of like unwieldy in their aliveness. Again, I think this often teaches me something about the place where I'm working and also allows me to have a direct sensory experience with natural phenomena. This one is called Entwined Blooms, and it's 2 beargrass flowers that I braided together and fastened with twine. It was meant to be a poetic gesture to sort of talk about how our fates are often bound up in each other, not just between humans, but also between other species as well. Juxtaposition is really important in my work. I like to create contrasts between organic and man-made materials, both within images, but also across images as well. So on the left, we have a spider web, which is emblematic of interconnectivity and like the web of life. And then on the right, we have this cracked windshield, which we can associate with the automobile and modernity and accidents and fracturing. Sort of in a similar vein, it's of an active clear cut in southern Washington. I took this photo on the way back from foraging matsutake mushrooms last year. At the time, I was super into Anna Singh's book called The Mushroom at the End of the World. It's amazing, and it's really been pivotal in the way I think about ecology in the Anthropocene. In the book, she examines matsutake mushrooms, which are these really expensive, valued global commodity, and they grow primarily in disturbed forest ecosystems in the Pacific Northwest. So she uses a specific species as an example to think about how life forms can thrive on a damaged planet. So I think this is really related to the questions I'm trying to think through in my photographs. Photograph bodies on the landscape. I think it's a good reminder of our physical existence in relation to the materiality of nature. In this particular photograph, I like the tension. I like the way that limbs are bending and interlocking to sort of create a visual representation of entanglement. And all this is playing out in the Columbia River Gorge, which is a really iconic example of Pacific Northwest nature. But at the same time, this place is really entangled with industry and nearby metropolitan areas. There are also times when I want to interject my own body into the pictures. It feels like it's a way to sort of physically bond with the land through vulnerability and direct experience. I'm also trying to think about how, as like a sensory being and ultimately a human animal, I fit within the landscape and the environment. Okay, so I'm going to transition into some new photographs that I've taken since being here at Sitka. I have sort of fallen into working with this site that is 30 minutes south on the Salits River. It's tracts of continuous forests that are in various stages of recovering from clear-cut logging. So the land is like heavily disturbed, and many would consider it damaged. And when I found the site, I had a lot of conflicting emotions. I felt sort of outraged and sad, but also this sense of freedom and possibility as well. So I wanted to sort of spend time there and maybe clarify those feelings for myself. So I went almost about every day for a couple weeks and just tried to notice the different life ways that were emerging as the landscape is recuperating, both in like the animals and the plants, but also the signs of human use. Over here on the right, there's, evidence of target practice. There's also a foxglove that's sort of recolonizing the space. So I was happy that I was able to capture this assemblage all in one photo. And overall, the project has been a really powerful endeavor in building something beautiful with the material of ruin, which I think will be a really important skill as sites like these continue to proliferate. And this is the assemblage I found as is. I often will intervene on the site, but this situation was just so absurd, I couldn't even make it up. I just really like how the tree is branded with like a luxury car brand. It's a very simple photo, but I think it's really charged because of the associations we have with this logo. And then whenever I found signs of forest health or recuperation, they felt particularly precious, like something I would want to protect. So I tried to act that out with this self-portrait here. I also had a lot of fun sculpting and arranging the logging debris. This is a sculpture with two slash stumps that I found. It relies really heavily on balance. Again, I'm taking inspiration from Andy Goldsworthy and using materials of the landscape. And after the photo was taken, the sculpture remained, but eventually was disassembled by the elements. And this last one is sort of an offering to the clear cut. These are oxeye daisies that I found on site, and I put them in a discarded Bud Light bottle that I also found. And the stump sort of became an altar for this regenerative ritual to the land. Yeah, that's all I have to share from the project so far, but I have a few roles being developed as we speak. So I'm excited to see how the project continues to come together. And I imagine it'll be something that I extend beyond my time at Sitka. I'd really like to come back to the site over time and continue photographing it as it changes. Yes, thank you all so much for looking and listening. If you want to connect with me or see more of my work, you can check out my website or follow me on Instagram.
Thank you so much, Jordan. And there's a comment that came in the chat that the web and windshield interconnection and all of the entanglement imagery is so beautiful, and lots of compliments and thanks to Nadja as well. Sirintip Phasuk is a Bangkok-born Swedish Thai artist, and she is Sitka's most recent artist at sea resident to return to dry land. She is an experimental, trilingual singer and composer in both the pop and jazz worlds. Her unique use of effect pedals with her voice has brought her around the world performing with 4-time Grammy Award winner Snarky Puppy, Benny Anderson of ABBA, opening for Wayne Shorter at the Polar Music Prize, and competing as a finalist in the Thelonious Monk International Competition. As a sought-after voice in the studio, Sirintip can be heard on over 30 officially released recordings and is an Ableton, TC Helicon, and Earthquaker devices artist. Her just released album Carbon is based on the causes and effects of climate change, represented through a music album, installations, interactive websites, and more. Through her research with climate scientists, Sirintip aims to create an empathetic bridge for this polarizing topic by including data, recycled materials, and natural phenomena into her music. So wherever you are, please make some joyful noise and welcome Sirintip Phasuk to Sitka.
Thank you so much, Allison. It's so good to see you again. And thank you so much, Nicola and Tamara, for having me. And I also want to give a shout out to Nadja and Jordan. It's so great to hear about your projects. Like every time I'm exposed to other artists, I'm like, whoa, I get so inspired. So yes, my name is Sirintip. I was born in Bangkok in Thailand. And then when I was 11, I moved to Stockholm, Sweden. And since almost 8 years, I've been now living in New York City. So I'm going to share my screen here. So that's my name. That's how you spell it. I know it's a little weird, so that's why I put it out there, just to kind of help you. It means an angel from above in Thai language. And it is my real name. It's in my passport and everything. So I went to the Royal College of Music in Stockholm, where I did my undergrad. And then I moved to New York to do my master's at the Manhattan School of Music. And since then, I've been living in the city, recording and touring. And like Allison just mentioned, I just released my album almost 2 weeks ago now called Carbon. And I just wanted to kind of share a little bit about that album, because that's gonna help you understand how I ended up at Sitka, because everything is very interconnected. So for Carbon, it's a total of 13 songs where I interpreted 13 different topics. And when it comes to climate change music, a lot of times it's very much on the nose, and a lot of people who are not open to talking about climate change can definitely feel very disconnected and discouraged to it. And I feel like those are kind of the people I want to reach the most instead of talking only to people who already resonate and try to do better for the world. I really wanted to try to connect with people who don't, and to try them to do better and feel inspired. So when I was researching about this album, I gave myself different topics every day, and I would do a bunch of research, and then I was think about how can I turn this into music. So when I was researching about the global average temperature and the 1.5 Celsius scenario, I decided to do something called data sonification, where I took data from NASA's website from 1880 up until 2012, and then turned each pitch in each year into, I organized it in, when you organize pitches, you essentially come up with a melody. That's what a melody is, it's organized pitches, and created a whole composition based on that. To bring awareness to plastic pollution, I took plastic trash from my kitchen, which you might see here, and I recorded it and turned it to plastic percussion set. Later on in the studio, which was a solar powered studio, we also had the drummer play on plastic trash, and the piano was recorded through this plastic water jug. You can see that there's a tiny little microphone inside there, and it created a really cool tremolo effect. And to bring awareness to biodiversity, I transcribed the mating dance of the black sicklebill and turned that into a vocal loop. And that's how Carbon happened, and I'm really excited if you guys want to take a listen. It's out on Apple Music and Spotify and Deezer and Tidal and all those platforms. But essentially, when I was working on Carbon, I was doing all the research myself, and I started to feel like I was reaching the limit of what I can find on my own. So I stumbled across the application to Sitka and to the Artists at Sea residency, where I could work with scientists firsthand. And I applied, and I was very, very lucky that I got chosen, and it's been the best trip of my life. It's been the most incredible 2 weeks. And on this research vessel, there were 25 scientists there from Oregon State University and I always mix this up now, Oregon State University, University of Oregon, there we go, both of them. And the Hatfield Center. Sue, I saw that you're here, so hi. So they were researching plankton on this research vessel, and not only were they very warm and inviting, they also let me work with them and help them. And I wish that I could show you, but I have these scribbles, I don't know if you can see because I'm tiny on the screen, of these marine biology lessons I would take from the scientists. So they would just teach me everything. And then from the bottom of the ship, we can see here in the top right corner, I would turn everything that I learned into music. And essentially it ended up being 4 types of work. I created soundtracks for underwater footage from the scientists, and I continue to do work of data sonification of the ISIS data, which is one of the camera systems on the ship that could capture all the plankton in the water in real time. And I also took biomass data from the global, from NOAA's website. I was also fortunate to interview the scientists about their favorite planktons in first person, and I would then turn that into lyrics. And I also wrote some music for VR and AR. So I wanted to now show you some of this work, and they're still just drafts because right after I came back from Sitka, I needed to just jump back into Carbon and put that out into the world. But I will finish up all this work for our exhibition next fall. Let me show you. This is the coolest one. So this is a siphonophore. And I got this video from Kelly Sutherland, one of the lead scientists on the ship, which she filmed herself. So I created this soundtrack for this Manomia bucca siphonophore. So data sonification, if you don't know what that means, is that you're turning data into pitches. So during my time on the research vessel, there was a viral article that came out that said that 90% of planktons are gone, which is not true. So as a response to this article, I talked to the scientists on board, and then I took this data from NOAA's website. And this data is from 2012, and it sounds like it's a long time ago, but in the science world, it is actually recent with data from 10 years ago. So what you can see here is the latitude. So we're going from the South Pole to the North Pole. And then we got the longitude. So we're going from west to east. And then you can see here the biomass of the planktons. And the higher the pitches, the more planktons were in that specific part of the world, and the lower the pitches, there's less of them. So for instance, around the continents, so here's the North Pole, there's not a lot of planktons. And then in the continent, there's more. And then around the Earth equator, there's not that much. And then again, back at the continents, there are more of them. So I'm just going to show you a short little clip of how this sounds. Just gonna stop here. This entire piece is 7 minutes long because there's a lot of data. But what I wanted to show you that I'm working on with one of the professors that ended up being on the ship too. His name is Danny Pimentel, and he works in VR. So what we're trying to create now is a VR experience of this. So in VR, you can experience moving from the South Pole to the North Pole. So you're traveling through the water. So that was a very, very rough cut, but the idea is that you're going to be able to see the different planktons, and we're going to be, I'm going to be narrating so the viewer can experience the different planktons in real time. I want to show you just one last thing about the Giving Voice project. One of the scientists that I interviewed, he works with diatoms, which is a type of phytoplankton. And the diatoms are kind of the farmers of the ocean. So based on what he told me about the diatoms, I decided to write lyrics based on his story. And you can read them right here. And the idea with the Giving Voice project is to make these organisms that we don't see become more humanized, and in that way I hope that people will start to care more and therefore more willing to make a change and do better for the world. So this is a short clip of the diatom farmer. And so far everything I've showed you, these are all sneak peeks and drafts. They're not done at all, but I love Sitka, so I'm sharing all this with you.
Into the unknown, who knows where the sun shines? I'll find a place and I will make it
because we're about to run out of time, I'm just stopping it right there. The question might be, why have I dedicated my art to climate change? And that's because I've been concerned about it since I was a teenager. I grew up in Thailand, and I've seen the consequences of climate change firsthand with flooding, and also with the oceans that I grew up with, having a lot of fish and a lot of corals. And now when I've gone back as a young adult, it's gone. And also being in Sweden, it's a very progressive country, which has made it possible and easier for people to live more sustainably. And I think that that's a really big thing. I've seen how music has the power to inspire change. And I've also had a lot of conversations now with scientists where scientists have been aware of these issues for a really, really long time, but the public doesn't listen. And I think that art can be that perfect bridge. Essentially what I would want to do next, it looks like I might potentially be going to Greenland in July to study icebergs and glaciers. And I would love to do that, to make that happen. And also Tamara has connected me with a fungi expert called Craig C. And I would love to be able to really learn from scientists firsthand and to create an interdisciplinary suite where I can really communicate about our world and how we connect with the world and the interconnectedness of all organisms, especially microorganisms. It's so easy to think that the things we don't see are not important. And it's actually the opposite. Phytoplanktons creates the majority of the oxygen we breathe on Earth. So that was all for me. And thank you so much for having me. And if you want to stay connected, please find me online. And thank you so much, Allison.
Thank you. Thank you, Sirintip. Speaking of nature, the power is out at Sitka. We think we have about 45 minutes or so more of Wi-Fi before we can use that at Sitka. So I think we'll have just enough time for the final three presentations. Blue Sky photography resident Sam Wrigglesworth is an emerging photographer and arts worker based in Oregon. Their practice focuses on interrelations between memory, landscape, and expanding narratives surrounding feminist queer representation and histories. Since graduating with a BFA in photography from the University of Oregon, they have shown work in galleries in the Pacific Northwest, including Blue Sky, Oregon Center for the Photographic Arts, Photographic Center Northwest, Tropical Contemporary, Astoria Visual Arts, Carnation Contemporary, and Soil. Recently, Sam directed the Transformation Artist Residency Program for trans artists in Oregon, curated an exhibition at Anti-Aesthetic in Eugene, Oregon, and has been a contributing arts writer at Variable West. Sam has participated in artist residencies, including the School of the Alternative. And tonight, please join me from the dark of the library in welcoming them in residence to the Sitka Center.
Hey, thank you so much for that introduction. And I apologize that I'm in the dark. I tried to orient myself near the window, but we're doing what we can. Yeah, and I want to start by thanking all the staff at Sitka and also Blue Sky and that partnership that y'all share to bring more photographers here. I've been really grateful for the time. I'm an artist working with the natural environment, and maybe you can hear that thunder right now. Whoa. And I would like to take a moment to acknowledge that I'm also a white settler artist, and I am making work on the many rightful Indigenous territories, including but not limited to Kalapuya, Chinook, Cowlitz, Tacoma tribes, and Cow Creek Umpqua tribes. And I've spent most of my life living on Chinook and Kalapuya lands. And then a note on my process, I'm working with medium and large format cameras. I work analog, which means that there is a bit of a time gap between when I make an image in camera and when I develop it and scan it and look at it and think about it. So today I won't be sharing anything that I've been making, at least in camera while here at Sitka. Instead, I'll be sharing some slightly older work and then leading into some newer directions. And then also a brief note on the content that I'm sharing today. There will be some nudity, just want to respect that people may be coming from different contexts. Okay, so I'm gonna start with some slightly older work that I was making while in undergrad. Thinking a lot about relationships with narrative and memory in the landscape, thinking about presence and absence, a pretty rich topic in photography, if you ask me, and thinking about that, visualizing that in the landscape, thinking about figures, but kind of one step removed, where a body starts and ends and what it might leave. It might be hard to tell, but this is an impression of a bodily figure in grass. And for a while, I was thinking about the human figure in the landscape, but kind of one step removed. And I was making this work for a while, and then I realized that I wanted to incorporate my own figure. So then I started to do that and started making self-portraits. This is one of my earlier self-portraits. There's a lot of things we could say about this, but in general, perhaps more passive than active, or at least it seems that way. And in all my self-portraiture, especially in postures like this, I don't make any effort to hide my cable release. You can see it in my hand. For me, this signifies authorship and also autonomy over making an image and the situation at hand. And in case, for those of you who don't know what a cable release is, that's just the black bulb you can see in my hand. I don't know if you can see my mouse or not in the screen share, but it's right there. And that just triggers the exposure in the camera and makes the image. So you can see it again here. So there's another self-portrait. I tend to make images near bodies of water very often. I think of it as a very rich psychic space that holds a lot of folklore, narratives, changing interpretations. I kind of like the idea of depicting moments where you're not quite sure what happened before, what happened after. Maybe I'm floating, maybe I'm sinking, we aren't sure. And this is a portrait I made, you probably tell, like the same day as that previous portrait. I wasn't thinking about this at the time that I made this image, but more recently I was traveling through Appalachia late this summer and early this fall. And I was introduced to the genre of murder ballads, which is a very diverse folklore genre or folk music genre. And but there is a pattern that I'm picking up on of women dying at the hands of men and their bodies being discarded in bodies of water or somewhere in the forest. And I've been kind of like listening to this music continually, looking at the lyrics, being curious about the stories. And I saw this image while preparing for this talk, and I kind of reinterpret it as this idea of reclamation of these collective narratives that maybe converge together in some way. And then I'm going to go through a few images and talk a little less because I want to make sure I don't go over 10 minutes. This is an example of how I think about installation. Thinking about scale, the larger images are 40 inches wide by 32 inches tall, and the smaller 16 by 20. Thinking about how images talk together, maybe reinforce each other. Oops. And then I am continually making self-portraiture, but I'm also working with my close community now, working with collaborative portraiture, oftentimes talking a lot about people's relationship with representation and having long conversations about how they want to be depicted before I even take out my camera. I work very slowly, especially when I'm with other people. Okay, and then going into some newer influences, and I'll close with some images that are not quite as resolved and just like the directions that I'm thinking about right now. This is not my image. This is a older image, probably from the late 70s, that I found through the University of Oregon archives. There's so much I could say about this. This could be a whole other talk, but these are from women's lesbian separatist lands that exist in Southern Oregon. This is kind of from their heyday in the 70s. On the left is the artist Jean Mountaingrove, and on the right are artists that are participating in a workshop that she's teaching at. These are from photography workshops that took place on one of the land projects during the summertime. They were called the Ovulars. Many artists taught at these workshops, including Jean, pictured here, and her partner Ruth Mountain Grove, T. Corinne, Carol Newhouse, Joan E. Byron, or Jeb. And I recently heard a rumor that Barbara Hammer may have like showed up at some point, but I haven't substantiated that. But these workshops, we're thinking a lot about feminist representation throughout art history, how men have pictured women throughout art history, and how women might picture each other and how that might be different, especially in the context of lesbian sexuality. And they were interrogating many patriarchal power dynamics that are in how we talk about photography and how we talk about knowledge sharing also. So even in the title of the workshops, Ovulars is a reaction to the more commonly used seminar, right? And instead of taking or shooting a photograph, they would instead say that we're making a photograph. Instead of calling someone a subject, they might call them a muse. What else? Well, instead of history, they might say herstory, right? And I discovered, or maybe I shouldn't say discovered, but came to learn about these women and their life in the earlier stage of pandemic, before vaccinations, and was just so entranced by these notions of community and other world building. And I just was hungry for more and spent about a year trying to reach out, trying to figure out who I could talk to see where they're at right now. And over time, building trust, I was able to visit and I lived on the different land projects off and on this past spring. This is an idea of the setting. These are communities that are tucked away in the Southern Oregon mountains. Pretty hard to know how to find them unless if you know, you know. Yeah, pretty, how should I say it? Like a rhizomatic way of building trust. Like once you know someone, they know someone else, and I've been kind of learning more about them through that. And definitely not like a centralized land project. There's a lot of different places that have different customs, but I've been meeting a lot of people. And yeah, and these are some self-portraits that I made after a long day of gardening this past spring. That was part of how I was earning my keep. Thinking about interrelationships that our bodies have with the natural world, or the more than human world, perhaps I should say. We are natural also, of course. So this is Queen Anne's lace, which is not to be confused with poison hemlock, which will hurt you. But for those of us with wombs, Queen Anne's lace can be taken as an implantation inhibitor to prevent pregnancy, kind of the same concept as a morning after pill. And in the context of rising control in our governments, thinking about power that exists all around us, and different ways to think about liberation. Thinking about representation of the female form throughout our history and reclaiming it or processing it in some way. Some portraits. And this is kind of like a tongue-in-cheek feminization of the landscape. Yeah, and I'm making a lot more portraits. I'm visiting again soon and have a lot more that I'm scanning right now. And yeah, thank you so much. That's my info. If you want to reach out, feel free. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Sam. Gaurav Patekar is a Boston-based Indian artist. He creates media art, particularly kinetic artworks that take inspiration from movements in nature. He is deeply interested in understanding our relationship with ecology and technology and how it informs behavior. Gaurav's work often mixes curiosity, playfulness, and whimsy. He makes use of digital fabrication tools such as 3D printing and laser cutting alongside traditional building techniques. He has a background in media art, new media design, and mechanical engineering. Please join me and make some thunderous noise in welcoming Gaurav Patekar to Sitka.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about the project that I started around right at the beginning of the pandemic. And it also, the pandemic influenced the project a lot. And yes, I like talking about how that happened. So in the early days of pandemic, it was my first year living in Boston. I was kind of used to that energy of like crowded streets and people everywhere I go in. I would often go to MIT and the area around it, and there were always cars and people and like students going from one class to the other. And then in the pandemic, that whole landscape that was just like 6 months old for me completely transformed into a dystopian landscape where there's nothing happening there. And I would take walks in the early days of the pandemic, and it was very strange. But then as I continued doing that, I started observing movement of different natures. I started observing a lot of movement that was there in plants and leaves, and then I noticed how every day I go on the same path, there is something new that I'm able to see. And so I wanted to explore that in some way. I was not really sure what to do with that. And I would also see these forms like um, yeah, like the juxtaposition of natural elements with man-made elements and how they're intersecting with these forms and creating things that are not really organic, but they are also organic. So I wanted to understand that connection. And so I started collecting these samples of things that I would come across, and I wanted to explore that movement and that playfulness. And that was also the time I had gotten a 3D printer at home, and I couldn't go to my lab, so I had to be at home and work with the tools that I had. So I started this small project of trying to replicate these movements through mechanical elements. And so this is sort of the process that would happen, where I would see something outside, then try to kind of figure out some mechanism, try to model it in a 3D modeling software, and then print it, and then trying to see how that, like the conversation between the first frame and the last frame, that is something I was trying to understand. So these are some of the other things that I built. And and this was also the time when like the pictures of the orange sky in San Francisco were showing up a lot on the news. And also that was the first time wildflowers were such a, like for me, it was a really new thing to see all these forests burning for months at end. And I was also reading a lot about climate change and all the intricacies of it, and how complex all the ecosystems are and how interrelated they are. And so um, I was trying to understand that through looking at different climate data. And this was something that, yeah, this was one of the graphs that I came across in a paper. The paper was called World Scientist Warning of a Climate Emergency. And what they are talking about in the paper is around the 20 to 30 different parameters that they call vital signs for the planet. And these are population, GDP, rate at which we are cutting down forests, and the rate at which CO2 emissions are going up. And the paper is we need to look at all of these things together to understand what is really happening with climate change and how the world is changing. And so these were, at this point of time, these were two different streams, two different projects for me. And I wanted to talk about climate data in some way, but I was not really sure how to go about it. And then it sort of like both these projects sort of merged together, whereas it just made a lot of sense to use elements of nature to talk about the changes that are happening in the ecosystem. So then I started experimenting with how can I use, like what kind of stories can these natural elements tell you, and how can they convey uh, the data that is like the change that is happening in nature. So this was one of the early experiments where the leaf is retracing the graph of CO2 emissions over a span of 40 years. And so you can see as the years progress, you can see how the speed increases, and that is also conveyed through the urgency that is there in the sound. And this was another exploration where the data is conveyed through the speed of the movement. Okay, I have so this was the outcome of the project. This is something I exhibited around 6 months back, and this has multiple sculptures that are all expressing data about a different parameter. So there's surface temperature change, CO2 emissions, and so I'll be continuing. So this project will end once I have one sculpture for each of those graphs that I showed earlier. So I plan to continue adding more to this series, and hopefully I'll have a couple of them in this residency. And I've also been thinking about, like, since I got accepted to Sitka, I've been thinking about rain, because that's something that gets mentioned a lot in the orientation booklets, and then this is the first time I have been on the West Coast, so I was not really sure like how much rain should I be expecting, but subconsciously I've been thinking about rain a lot, and I have been so I think I want to explore the rain through some sort of prints. So this is something I had done a couple of years back, where this is a plotter which is creating these plots through some kind of program. So I'm able to create a code that can then create these generative patterns. And then on the right, there was this thing that I did where I made it just a set of lines, but then I put it out in the rain for a few minutes, and then I was able to capture the raindrops in the smudges of the rain, in the smudges of the lines. So So I like that that intersection of something that is generated through a machine and then something that is created by the actual raindrops, and I want to explore that intersection of if I can create plots about rain and then have rain also as an input. So yeah, I'm not really sure where that is going to go, but I'm almost at 11 minutes. I'm going to, yeah, so that's where I'm at. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Gaurav. I feel like I could see Sirintip starting to compose in her mind. She's nodding yes.
Yeah,
Watching.
yeah.
One of my favorite aspects of these talks and in this format is all of the through lines that just show up. And I'm sure we all see different ones between different artists and the images and the way that they're working with related subject matter and different subject matter. We have one final presentation and I'm really looking forward to it. Camas Logue is a Sitka Jordan Schnitzer printmaking resident. He's a multidisciplinary artist who belongs to the Klamath, Modoc, and Northern Paiute tribes. Logue uses traditional indigenous weaving and carving alongside oil painting, illustration, and printmaking to create his work. His weaving and jewelry are made from land-based materials such as spruce roots, cedar roots, tulle, cattails, and bear grass. All of his work, whether oil, copper plate, woodblock, or illustration, is a reflection of his connection to place and his relationships with his ancestors. Logue's work has been shown at the Portland Art Museum, the Museum of Contemporary Craft, and many other places in Portland, Oregon, Optic Gallery in Corvallis, Oregon, Lux Art Center in LaConner, Washington, and Abrams Art Center in New York City. Alongside his traditional and studio practices, he and his carving apprenticeship, Logue is also a professional musician playing drums and guitar in the indigenous queer band Black Belt Eagle Scout. So imagine you can't wait for the concert to start and make some noise to welcome Camas Logue to Sitka.
Hi, thank you. Klisi Gawasasis Camas Logue. I'm an enrolled member of the Klamath tribes. I belong to the Klamath, Modoc, and Northern Paiute. Multidisciplinary artist, so painting is my primary language. I also weave traditional Klamath and Northwest coastal basketry. I carve, I create commercial illustrations, and I'm also a musician in the band Black Belt Eagle Scout. I live in the Swinomish Indian tribal community in Northwest Washington with my wife and family. And my studio space is located along the 11-mile Swinomish Channel that separates the Fidalgo Island from the mainland Skagit County. From the window of my studio, looking across the water, I can see the tribal fishing boats and Swadob's ancestral village. This is a place that we gather for tribal canoe journeys, races, meals, and other community events. Being able to see this park is also really special to me. It's one of my first large carving projects was to create a series of 6 migrating salmon pools as the entranceway to the park. So it's really nice. I can see it right outside my window. Since the summer of 2020, I have been apprenticing with my father-in-law, Swinomish master carver, Kevin Paul. And together we've been working on community carving projects and gallery pieces. We recently had a pole raising for a 19-foot cedar story pole that we carved for the newly built LeConner Swinomish Library. So as a large part of my practice, I like to spend time hiking and walking, just being outside in nature to observe and learn from the land. You know, part of being at Sitka that really appealed to me was being able to be in that beautiful old growth Sitka forest and being able to hike around and just be in that beautiful place. You know, sometimes when I'm out in nature, I'll just lie even on my chest just to simply observe the complex symbiotic relationships in just like a microcosm of the earth. You know, looking at stones or moss or small cracks in the dirt, even like little webs of mycelium underneath the duff of the forest floor, and being able to look closely at these interconnections, these layers and patterns that the land creates. And these things are really what highly influence a lot of my work. When I make a painting, for instance, I begin by creating layers and washes of pigment. So I use different tools and oils to erode and dissolve the layers of paint. I use gestural movements to disrupt and influence the paint, the way like a storm or an erosion, might create different forms upon the earth. So oil paint is made up of minerals, oil, and earth. And as a fluid medium, paint is really governed by the same geological processes as the land. So I'm interested in representing the dynamic events that occur at the Earth's surface. I use different tools and actions to mimic the natural forces, like seismic shaking, wind, moving water, freezing, thawing. And through these layered pigments and applied process, I encourage the painting surface to experience deformation, translocation, or chemical reaction even. So with my recent residency at Sitka, I had the honor and the privilege to work with master printer Julia DeMario, and with Julia's guidance, I was able to explore how I could use this new medium of copper plate intaglio printmaking to express the movement and patterns I sort of create within my paintings. I tried different techniques on the copper plates, and I ended up really loving the fluidness of white ground to create the sort of gestural movements and shades on the plate. And then I'd follow it by using a hard ground to etch the patterns on my plates. I also came with a project I wanted to work on that was strictly illustrative, using dry point to scratch a copper plate image of my tribe's sacred and endangered chewam fish. And these were once the most important food fish for my tribe in the Klamath Lake region. Chewam were caught by the thousands and remain a centerpiece of my tribe's way of life and annual return of chewam ceremony. These fish are so important to my tribe that within our creation story, we are told if the chewam fish die, we as a people die. So historically, these chewam fish fed our people. We have a physical and spiritual connection to these fish, and the health of our people have really suffered from their loss. And some people marginalize these fish and say they're not as important as other food sources, like the cattle who are degrading the water in our homelands and threatening these fish to extinction. But to us, this is just saying that our people are not as important. So for me, creating this plate was really important, not only because of my connection to this fish, but also as a way to create conversation and awareness about it as well. So I will show you some of the things. Let's see. So this is Swadob's ancestral village. This is right across from where I live, and this is where the entrance poles I carved were. This is during our annual canoe journey. So you see all the different large canoes lined up along there. This is the entrance to the village. So in this photo, I only got one of the salmon, but there's actually 6 carvings that are all that same scale. Here I am. I'm working on. This is the pole I was working on for the LeConner Swinomish Library. It's old growth cedar pole. It's a picture of me and my father-in-law there. We're standing in front of the pole. That's the day that it got to be raised up. There's a welcome figure, salmon, and an eagle, all depicted on that pole. And because it was for the library, it was sort of the theme of it was the welcome figure is welcoming people to the library, welcoming people to the land. The salmon are a symbol of sharing, generosity, and the eagle is knowledge. And this is one of my paintings, a lot with oil. This painting is called Arriving Late to a Party in a House We Were Evicted From Long Ago, which is kind of conversation about Indigenous representation within America. This is a series of paintings that I just finished. They're all made up of wild pigments that were harvested all within tribal territory, my tribal territory, and they're all somewhat abstract pieces, but also representing places with spiritual significance within our tribal boundaries. And it was a really fun project just to find these pigments and create these paintings, all out of things that were within a very small area of land. This is one of the plates that I created at Sitka during my residency. You can see the white ground kind of creates the darker shading, and then the line work was all done with hard ground afterwards. This is another one we did with sort of this blue ink. Julia was really amazing with, I would describe a color or show her a color, and she would go over there and mix away with the inks and then show me the color, and it would like each time was like, yeah, that's exactly what I wanted. This is one of the proofs of the chawam fish. And this is my little buddy, Ferguson, who hangs out in the studio. That's Julia's dog. He was a lot of fun. And here's a little video of Julia pulling one of my plates. And that is all. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Camas. And oh, that video was fun to see. I don't think I've ever seen one of our printmaking residents show a print being pulled like that. That was a delight. Just in awe of the quality of all of your work, the through lines between your work, and it just makes it all like I'm reinvigorated all over again. Just so excited to have you all as part of our 2022-2023 residency cycle. So thank you, Camas, Gaurav, Sam, Sirintip, Jordan, and Nadja for sharing your work. Thank you everyone for tuning in. We get such great audiences for our resident talks. Good night, everyone. Thank you so much.